We're looking at your Microbiology and Biotech EOG review guide. We're first going to look at microbes and pathogens. And remember, the word pathogen refers to disease. So it is disease-producing substance. So that is using your stems. Patho is referring to disease or suffering. So that'll help you get started. Viruses are particles that consist of a nucleic acid and a protein shell, a protein coat that requires a host cell, a living host cell to reproduce. And examples of viruses, influenza, which is also called the flu, common cold virus, AIDS, smallpox, Ebola, West Nile virus. So there's lots of different types of viruses. And remember that viruses are the smallest pathogen as well. Bacteria are prokaryotes. So bacteria are your example of a prokaryote organism because they do not have a nucleus. So no nucleus. Three main shapes of bacteria: the coccus or cocci, which is the plural for it. So that is the circular or round shape. Bacillus is the pill or the rod shape. And spirillum is spiral. So those are your three main shapes of bacteria. Examples of bacteria-based diseases are Lyme disease, which is transmitted through a tick, a vector of a tick, tuberculosis, cholera, which you can get from contaminated water, strep throat, streptococcus, which many of you may have had, pneumonia, and prokaryotes, no nucleus. Parasites also have to live in a host. They have to be inside of a host organism. Examples of parasites are tapeworm, fleas, ticks, and the botfly. Fungi. Most diseases that are caused by fungi are going to be unicellular organisms, and they are going to a lot of times infect either the skin or respiratory system if you have breathed in spores. Fungi are going to reproduce mostly with releasing spores, which are like those little mushrooms that you step on and all that black smoke goes into the air. Yeast is an example, ringworm, mold. Protists. Amoeba is one common example of a protist, and amoeba is going to move using pseudopods, which is your stem false and then pod referring to foot. Dysentery, that's amoebic dysentery, which is diarrhea until you die. And then paramecium is an organism that has a contractile vacuole. The contractile vacuole is an organelle that is used to basically squirt out excess water, so to release excess water. And the paramecium uses cilia to move. The euglena is an organism that uses a flagellum for movement. It has an eye spot. The eye spot will help it to detect sunlight so that it can go through photosynthesis, because the euglena can be an autotroph or a heterotroph. It can be autotrophic and go through photosynthesis if there's sunlight available, or it can be a heterotroph and can consume nutrients from its environment if there's no sunlight for photosynthesis. Next section, outbreaks, epidemics, pandemics. So diseases that can spread from one organism to another are called infectious diseases. An epidemic. An epidemic is an outbreak of a disease that affects many people in an area. Like the flu is often an epidemic, and it affects an area larger than expected. And if an epidemic spreads over a large area or throughout the world, then it is going to be called a pandemic. And remember your stem, pan means all. So, and then dem refers to like people or population. So all people is what that refers to. And some infected people may become immune. So they might become carriers. So if they're immune to a disease, then they will not receive it and they can't spread it. If they're carriers, then they will still have it, but they can spread it. So if they're immune, then they're not going to be spreading the infection. But if they're carriers, then they will have the disease, but no symptoms. And they can spread it. So they're still contagious, but they aren't sick, they don't act sick. So they do not show symptoms, but they can still get other people sick. Vectors, or referred to as biological vectors sometimes, because bio, remember, is your stem that means life. So biological vectors are organisms, not referring to humans. So I'm just going to put not human. And they will spread the disease. So that transmit disease. Ticks, mosquitoes, fleas, those are common vectors. They're common biological vectors that will spread a disease. So they oftentimes will spread that through a bite or through saliva. Conditions that are conducive to disease spread is going to be what a disease-causing organism, what a pathogen needs in order to thrive, what it needs in order to survive. So we've talked about how viruses need a host cell, parasites need a host, fungi and protists, they need watery environments. The next section here, transportation. So how do transportation and travel affect infectious disease? Well, they will affect infectious disease by making it easier to spread disease. And that can make an epidemic turn into a pandemic. SARS is one example. So that was spread by people on airplanes. They would travel to another location and they would take that infectious disease with them, and people got to breathe. So people breathing, coughing, sneezing, and then other people breathing in. And then bubonic plague, the Black Death, that was spread through fleas that were living on rats that were on ships, trade ships that were back in like the 1300s. Prevention, how do you prevent infectious diseases? So one example is antimicrobial solution. So antimicrobial solutions are like Lysol, Clorox, Germex. So those things help to prevent the growth of microbe and will kill pathogens generally. Antibiotics. So an antibiotic is literally using the stem here, the stems that you have. Anti is against, bio is life. So antibiotics will kill bacteria. If you have a question on your EOG asking about antibiotics, it is 100% referring to bacteria, nothing else. Antibiotics do not work against viruses. Antibiotics kill bacteria and prevent them from reproducing. One way to prevent infectious diseases from spreading is using good hygiene. So that means like washing your hands, covering your mouth when you cough, that kind of thing. Infectious disease can also be stopped by killing the pathogen. So killing the disease-causing organism. So the thing that causes the disease, and that is going to be through the use of antibiotics if it is bacteria. And if it is a virus, there are some antiviral drugs. Although viruses, many times, viral diseases just have to run their course. So you just have to deal with it and have the symptoms, and then hopefully we'll get better a little bit later on. Treatment.